Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session of our seminar, The Cinematic Frontline, Gender, War, and the Politics of Storytelling in Girls of the Sun. In Girls of the Sun, a film written and directed by Eva Husson, rooted in the real-life resistance of Kurdish women fighters against ISIS. Narrative becomes a weapon, and the filmmaking process itself, a war of logistics, ethics, and representation. This seminar investigates what it means to build a politically charged film within the transnational machinery of cinema, where personal vision must pass through the gauntlets of finance, geopolitics, reception, and representation. Structured as a four-part exploration, this seminar traces the full arc of making Girls of the Sun, from initial research and writing to the labyrinth of financing and international co-production, to the ethical negotiation of trauma and representation, and finally to the public reception of the work, including the paradoxical backlash it received amid the Me Too movement. Through theoretical texts, annotated script, and scene analysis, production documents, and conversation with key collaborators, we will investigate the tension between artistic freedom and political responsibility when making a film in a war zone of both bodies and narratives. This is a seminar for those interested in the creative process as a form of praxis, where storytelling becomes an act of resistance, and where directing is less about control than about the ethical navigation of forces far greater than oneself. Eva Husson is a French film director and screenwriter. She began her career as an actress before directing short films and music videos. In 2015, she directed her first feature film, Bang Gang, a modern love story, which competed at the Toronto International Film Festival. She then directed the Palme d'Or nominated film, Girls of the Sun, 2018, starring uh, Goj,
Gorshid
sorry,
Farahani.
Golshift Farahani and Emmanuel Berko. Our guest speaker of today's session, Xavier Mons, is an independent filmmaker and journalist. After studying journalism, he began his career in print media before moving into investigative reporting. He went on to direct several documentaries on violence in South America and the Middle East. Since late 2014, he has focused on documenting Kurdish resistance to the so-called Islamic State. He is best known for Ensorcelé par l'État islamique, 2014, in which he immerses himself alongside Kurdish fighters in the Sinjar Mountains, surrounded by ISIS. Since the Russian invasion of 2022, he has traveled to Ukraine 6 times, although he now strives to stay away from active conflict zones. Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the New Center for Research and Practice to offer me this opportunity, for offering me this opportunity. And thank you guys for enrolling. There's many of you, which is intimidating, and but you know it's very nice as well to see. I went on Discord a little bit before, and I had a look at your various profiles, so I can see there are artists, researchers, curious people of all paths. So I just really hope that you guys find what you're after in here. And please don't hesitate to ask questions or go a little bit further. As I said, I'm not a scholar. I'm a filmmaker, so there's many ways to approach this, and many questions that I'm sure I can answer. I'm more used to having people interviewing me than myself interviewing myself, which is, strange. And I would also like to thank Xavier. Xavier, can you turn on your mic for a second?
Yes, and I can. Hello, everyone.
So Xavier is a journalist that I met while doing some research on Girls of the Sun, and I started interviewing him. And we've known each other for about 10 years now, and he's been a crucial part of the process. That's what I really wanted him to be part of this first session. And he's like a mine of information and a great work companion. So thank you for being here today, Xavier.
Thank you.
And we'll get to Xavier a little bit later. But I wanted to start with the idea behind the cinematic frontline, gender war and the politics of storytelling. There is a notion for me of vision and violence, writing and filming against erasure. And I would start with this quote from Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, which hopefully you have read. It was in the syllabus. And which Fanon states, colonialism is not a thinking machine, nor a body endowed with reasoning faculties. It is violence in its natural state, and it will only yield when confronted with greater violence. The reason why I chose this quote specifically is that I think that despite the Kurdish issue not being an issue of colonialism per se, it also addresses the underlying stakes of women being kidnapped, and as an extension, the systemic issues women encounter as civilians and artists, in the world. And I think that, Fanon has always been quite relevant, but even more so nowadays, where we're sort of seeing the issues of colonialism just having ripple effects in our everyday lives, whether we live in Gaza or Paris or New York. Like those issues are at the core of what's eating at our society at the moment. And I feel they're extremely relevant to any kind of creative process that is trying to engage with a contemporary world right now. So I think for me, cinema has always been some sort of desperate attempt to act against disappearance and to put order into a world of total chaos. I think some filmmakers like Xavier are very brave because they actually confront the real and the ever-changing situation of the present as it's unfolding. And I think people like me, who come from fiction, I always need a mediation, and I always need time and some distance and the mediation of fiction to be able to put things in order. I'm not sure why that is specifically. The only thing I know is that speech is situated. One never speaks from nowhere, which is why, I also want you guys to have a look at Didier Ribon's Return to Reims, the book, because I feel it shines a light on some contradictions that there can be between where you speak and what you want to speak about, and the conflicting forces that that are at work in this. There's this one part of Return to Reims that resonates specifically with me, which is whatever you have uprooted yourself from or been uprooted from still endures as an integral part of who or what you are. Perhaps a sociological vocabulary would do a better job than a psychoanalytic one of describing what the metaphors of mourning and of melancholy allows one to evoke in terms that are simple, but also misleading and inadequate. How the traces of what you were as a child, the manner in which you were socialized, persist even when the conditions in which you live as an adult have changed, even when you have worked so hard to keep that past as a distance. That leads me to the question that many have asked me very early on in the process, which is why talk about, the Kurdish struggle, and why talk about the Kurdish female fighters? And to that question, I think we have to go way back when it comes to me to frame this with the idea that class and history inflect the ethics of representation. And remember that to speak of others is always to speak from the position that I have been allowed to occupy. And where do I come from? Well, my parents were teachers. So, I come from a background of cultural capital, not much means, but, we were always taught to look at the world from a very curious point of view. And not only that, but my grandfather was a Spanish soldier for the Spanish Republic who fled to France when he was a young man, and he started enrolling in the resistance, and he was part of that whole thing. And I came of age in the 90s in France, which was a very hedonistic era where there was a real intellectual backlash against Marxism. Initially, I came from quite a Marxist family in the sense that we had Trotskyists, we had communists, all of this that shaped our path in life and my way of thinking. But the 90s were like the reign of a deconstruction of that kind of Marxism, because especially in France, you had a lot of Maoists who had been said to sell themselves off to la gauche caviar, what we call the bourgeois left. So basically there was a sense of treason from this whole left, which sort of left me really hanging in the ether for a time, which led to my first feature film, Bang Gang, which was about teenagers being so lost in terms of how to anchor themselves as political beings that they ended up being, the commodification of themselves, if you will, using sex and social media and sex to just find their place in society, but ended up making no sense, and the whole system was collapsing. So after making Bang Gang, I was like, this is great, talking about lost teenagers in society. But I just felt that it was something that was a little bit needed to be pushed further. And the more I was reading about the Kurdish struggle, the more it resonated with family stories and family anecdotes, and the idea also that it was a struggle that was sort of transnational and that appealed to a lot of people around the world. And you can see it actually in Xavier's documentary. You have international fighters, not in the scope that happened during the Spanish Civil War, of course, but you could see that it appealed to people outside the circle. So that would be the first part of the response to why I was interested in this. The second one was related to my gender, in the sense that throughout history, women have been alienated from most armed conflicts as active agents. And the Kurdish fighters, female fighters, sort of gave us that back, some sort of legitimacy to be part of the struggle, the armed struggle. And I just had a child at the time, so I could not even think about enrolling myself in such a conflict. But I wondered what I could be contributing as a filmmaker to the conversation or the present of it. And I guess that was my answer. Was, is there a film for me in there that I know I can sustain, both intellectually, creatively, and economically, because as we all know, film is an industry. Also, it's just not an art. So it costs exceedingly, it costs a lot of money, and it's a factor that you have to take into account. So what happened was that I had heard in August 2014 of the kidnapping of the Yazidi women. And I thought it was a heartbreaking story, but as a woman and as a female filmmaker, I felt that just telling the story of women who are once again kidnapped and used as sexual slaves was so depressing, to be honest, that I just didn't know how to like bring that to life. And it's only a few months after that when I started reading reports of these women who escaped and fought back, that was like, oh, okay, that I can really like seize and explore, because I think it if I convey to the world that there is only hopelessness, I'm not being part of any kind of solution. I think, you know, like we don't really have the choice to with hopelessness, because otherwise we'll just commit, you know, collective suicide, and like this, it's an aporia. There's absolutely no point to this. But if we can somehow get together and feed from one another, and I think artists are part of this dynamic. I think that's the absolute best way to go about filmmaking. And also, to be honest with you, filmmaking, it's obviously not war. You know, there's no question of courage as such when it comes to filmmaking. But that said, it is brutal. It is brutal because no one's expecting you ever. Because like every movie is a small miracle. It's a mountain you have to move, and you're not about to move it if you don't believe it more than anyone else. There are hurdles like all along the way, and I'm gonna start talking about that. But it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. And anyone who wants to be a filmmaker needs to know that he's gonna feel like Sisyphus, like every day, trying to push boulders over the mountains that will come back every morning. And you know, I've been in the industry for about 15 years now, and I can tell you it's true of every project, and it just never gets easier. If anything, it gets harder in the sense that you're more and more aware of how difficult it is. At the beginning, at least you have the naivety of thinking that, you know, oh, you know, you can do it, which is very cute. And by the way, absolutely necessary. I think naivete is a necessary quality in as an artist. You have to think that what you're doing is necessary. You have to think that no one else can do it. It doesn't matter if you're completely delusional. You need that energy. You need that strength to keep going, because you're gonna fail again and again all the time. So once I started reading about these Yazidi women and like their escape, you know, I started, my first task, I guess, was is anyone else talking about this? Who can talk about this? Am I taking anyone else's seat when I'm doing that? And you know, the response at the time, and I don't know what the situation is at the moment, is that no one else was even considering telling the story. And I had political affinities with the subject that made me feel that there would be a lot of hurdles, but that I could actually think about tackling the project. And I sent an email at 2 a.m. to my producer from the previous film, Bang Gang, whose name is Didar Domery, and she will be a guest on our third session with us to talk about production. And Didar and I on this story made a lot of sense to go back to what I was mentioning about Didier Ribon and where you speak from. Who is Didar? She's a French producer, but born in Iran. And Didar had left the country after the Iranian Revolution when she was 8, you know, hiding behind a headscarf, crossing the mountains. I mean, like her story resonates so much with the, you know, the Yazidis fleeing. And so when I sent her the email, she responded immediately and said, let's do this. And that was one sentence, you know, and that just proves you that filmmaking is about energies meeting in a timely fashion, because there was nothing about this project that was easy or obvious. We were like, it just made absolutely no sense, you know, like on paper, like a white female filmmaker from France wanting to do a project about the Yazidi escaping, you know, like their plight was just, like there was no evidence, there was nothing obvious about this. But if you start scratching, there was a lot of things that were just aligned with who we were, Didar and I, that made absolute sense, and that sort of led us along the way to just find it not easy. It was never easy. It was super hard, but it just made so much sense for us to be able to do that, that it was obvious we were going to get there. And then, you know, like there was the question of the reception from the point of view of the elaboration of the initial story, which, you know, who is this story for? Because, you know, like obviously like the French market is not necessarily tailored to Kurdish community stories, but we are lucky enough in France. I don't know how you guys are familiar with French system, but it's a very curious system in the sense that it's really open to the world. We have a lot of international co-productions with other countries. We have a lot of minority stakes in productions, whether they be in Egypt, in Iceland, you know, in Taiwan, Vietnam. It's a part of our culture. So that was something as well, you know, that we could consider very easily. And so we started the heavy lifting, which was the research process. And once again, the way the French system works is that every production company like Didar's has what they called un fonds de soutien, which is a support fund. And the idea about this support fund is that it sort of gives you enough developing funds to explore stories that are like not necessarily easy to think about in other ways. So this allowed us to do a first field trip in Kurdistan for 10 days in 2016 to even see like what we were talking about. Because at the time, it was obvious for us that to keep on with the ethics that were ours, if we could shoot there, we should shoot there with people on the ground. And so we started from that hypothesis, and we were like, we're gonna do some research, meet some people, and see how we can build a story around that, which was extremely wild if you think about it, because we basically left France knowing that we didn't have anything specific yet. And so what happens during those moments is that you like when you go to territories in conflict, you find a fixer like war reporters who already has a network usually of people, and they put you in contact with people. And you know, obviously that trip was life-changing in many ways, because we met with, the survivors of these attacks, like women who had left, who had fled, and whether they were with kids or not. Some of them were fighters, some of them were just civilians. We met congresswomen who were basically, fighting as much as they could to get back any of these women. At the time, 7,000 women had been kidnapped. I think after a year, 2,000 or 2,500 had already returned. And I think to this day, unfortunately, about half have never returned 10 years later, if I remember the numbers correctly. So in any case, at the time, we met with these characters. And, when you see, for example, the character on TV of the congresswoman who gives her phone number, obviously all of these things are taken from real accounts. I quickly realized there was a discrepancy between the Western narrative of what was transpiring, like to us in the West, and the actuality of the events. And it sort of had several ways of expressing itself. One of them was, if you really looked closer, all the accounts seemed to stem from one account. And they were sort of rehashed by several journalists in the West. And so obviously we found a reality that was way more diverse and complex than what we had thought initially. And for example, if I start from the title, Girls of the Sun, the Girls of the Sun were a unit that was offered to be this unit of female fighters who had been taken slaves and escaped before, and that was a unit within the Peshmergas. And so when we arrived there, we sort of went on this quest to find this unit. That was the most obvious thing to do, right? And we quickly realized that these women were fighters, but they had never been authorized by their superiors to actually fight. But they were offered to the Western media as a narrative for female heroism. And, of course, we were like, shit, what are we going to do? Because if the real Girls of the Sun don't actually fight, are we betraying, the story of all these women who have escaped and have gone through this incredible journey of going back after being kidnapped. And then talking to people and, knowing also what happened with the YPG and Syria, and the fact that in Syria, you had women fighters. We just realized that it was one of the things we had to sort of make peace with, to make a fiction. Because at the end of the day, it didn't matter if the real Girls of the Sun had fought or not. The idea was that you had Kurdish female fighters. It was well documented. They were extraordinary. And in that specific conflict, maybe that special unit did not exist, but did it really matter to the truth of the overall narrative? Did it really matter that we had to reproduce an actual truth through facts of fiction? And we decided it was okay, and I stand by that choice to this day. So it was a little bit disappointing, and especially because we realized, that became clear, I think, the last 2 days of our trip. So we had this hope up until then that we could really find them. But at the end of the day, I think the role of fiction is also to build composite characters to avoid journalistic appropriation. I'm very aware of all of these issues, and I never wanted anyone person to feel that they had been stolen or that they had been robbed from their own story. So we really ended piecing together a lot of characters. I remember one woman who touched me very specifically. Her name was Zeri, and she's the main inspiration for the character of Lamia, because Zeri had to leave her son behind her, but she had given birth in captivity. So I sort of was able to divide her character between Bahar and Lamia. Bahar like having this leitmotif of finding her son again, and Lamia going through the birth during the crossing of the checkpoints. Do you guys, can you hear the honking outside, or is it okay? No, it's fine. That just stopped, sorry. So yeah, so we basically went quite systematic on that level with Didar, because we visited refugee camps, we visited Congress women, we visited you know, like the how do you call them in English, les passeurs, like the men who organized passing the women from the territory controlled by the ISIS to the Yazidi territories. We tried to paint the complex reality of this, because the reality of a war zone is that no one's a hero fully, and no one's a victim fully. Like there's so much, there are so many systemic issues at stake. There's so many like anecdotes that you always have to question to know whether or not they might be completely true. For example, there was this one fact that I kept on hearing from women, and it was that ISIS fighters kept on feeding their own babies to women. And the story was always had a different form. You know, once it was like the baby had been cut up in pieces, boiled, and given to like starving women, or like another one, it was baked, another one, it was grilled. And I just started wondering the validity, for example, of that specific anecdote. And I was like, well, maybe it just translates the monstrosity of the collective phenomenon. And maybe it doesn't need to be true, but it doesn't relate like a specific fact, because it was so prevalent in those accounts, and it sounded like one of those you know, like fairy tale horror stories from the Middle Ages, to sort of like warn the collective that it was something so widely horrific that it was beyond what words could actually convey, and like what conventional horror could actually convey. And I wondered if I should put it in the film, for example. And I had to think about the place of the Western audience that was primarily going to see the film, for example. And I was like, any Western audience, if you start talking about boiled babies, they will just like completely step out of the film, because it's too much for like what we can handle. And I needed people to stay on the course of the journey and never think even once, oh, that's just too much, that's ridiculous, I don't buy it. You know, you have to like do this constant dance between honoring the testimonies of the witnesses that you're interviewing, and also understanding your audience and who you're talking to, and making sure that you can keep them within the narrative, and never ever letting them out of sight, if you will. So do you guys have any questions about the research process and all of this? Malvika?
Hi, Eva.
Hello, Malvika.
I am an artist from India, and I just was curious about how did you get the people to kind of warm up and tell you stories? One, because when I correlated to my own country or wanting to find out about more war-driven zones in India, it would be Kashmir, where it is constantly in conflict. And there was a point a few years back where I kind of went into the place. So there was a lot of like making fun of the fact that I was an Indian in their own languages. There was a lot of, like flirting also, but at the same time, there was a lot of fear. So there were so many layers to it. But eventually, stories did come out. So I was wondering what that process was like for you and what it entailed when you were trying to get the community to warm up.
Look, in this particular instance, if you reframe the context, we were just like basically 1 year and a half, 2 years right after the actual event in Sinjar on August the 3rd, 2014. And people were completely traumatized by what happened, and they wanted to talk. They wanted to share that with the world. That said, you've got a point, because some people felt that journalists, and of course for them, I was a journalist, like it's really hard to sort of make the distinction when they're living in extreme conditions. So some people feel it's kind of pointless, and they're not going to do it. But that's where, if you work within a structure and you have a fixer, they will sort of lead you to people who are willing to talk and want to talk. And maybe one of the questions you can ask when you go yourself like towards people is that you can say, I completely understand that you may not want to talk, but like, do you know of someone who'd be willing to share? It's basically a chain of goodwill that starts happening. And if you start finding like a few people who are willing to talk, usually you just find your way from one person to the next, to the next, to the next. And you have to be open to dead ends also sometimes. Or you have to be open to people who, that's what I was mentioning earlier. It was super disturbing for me to, when I met some of the men who had passed women from the ISIS control zones to the free zones, I just realized a lot of ego was involved, and they really felt the need to make themselves be seen like heroes. And when you scratch the surface, there was always a fee involved. There was a lot of money exchanged. And so this notion of heroism took a whole different angle, when you started. So yeah, I guess if people don't want to talk, there's no point in pressuring them. They're traumatized. Like those conflicts, there's so much weight on like the psychic of individuals. It's just really hard. Like I showed in the film some Yazidi women, to be able to like survive psychologically, to just not completely disintegrate, they would randomly faint. Like the cognitive dissonance was such that to be able to like reboot, their brains would just like shut down from time to time. And so trauma is it's something you have to handle with like delicately.
It was more also about how did you prepare yourself? Like how did you prepare yourself, understanding that you are going to be meeting a layer of people who have that level of trauma? And how did you prepare for it before
Well,
going?
naivete is a very useful tool, because I did not prepare myself. Absolutely. The only thing I can tell you, because I think it's important to know, is that the day before, so I was going to fly to conflict zone, and I, like apart from my family history, I had literally zero, understanding of that. It's not something I had confronted myself before. So I was crying the day before. I was like, "What the fuck am I doing?" Like I'm an absolute idiot. And my son was 2 years old, and I was like, maybe I'm not going to see him ever again. And the reality is that it was, in a way, it was completely unrealistic and foolish of us to go there. One day, for example, we were about to go to Sinjar to talk to one of the female captains, and she called it off an hour before. And we were quite disappointed, but both my producer and I were like, well, if she thinks it's dangerous, we're not war journalists. Like, our mission, or like our position, is not to break a scoop and to break like a story. It's not that. So we're like, okay, let's not go. And I learned on Twitter, like an hour and a half later, there had been a mustard gas attack, and like 300 people had been injured, like on like at the spot we were supposed to go.
God.
And that is the reality of the field in the stories. And I guess you have to know your position beforehand, or you have to understand it once you're there. But to go back to your question more specifically, I did realize after this film that I was way too much of a sponge to be able to handle another one of those, because when I came back, I had skin rashes all over the body. I had nightmares, and
Yeah.
trauma is a burden you carry collectively. And,
Yeah.
I had accepted my share of responsibility by accepting to listen to these women. But yes, I was underprepared. And it was, to be honest with you, for example, I hadn't watched the film in 7 years, and I rewatched it for the seminar, and I cried a lot. And I don't think I cried because of the film. I cried because of like everything that I just extracted back from me and I thought had been settled. And yeah, I guess you can never like close those doors back. But it's okay. Like, it's, if you know why you're going, you'll deal with it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Eva.
Of course. Does anyone else have a question about the research? Okay. Well, that leads me to it's a great moment to talk to Xavier about his film. Xavier, are you there with us? Yes.
I'm here.
So let me introduce you to Xavier a little bit more. Xavier is like, he started his career as a war reporter, and we met during the research process of Girls of the Sun, because that's actually something I can elaborate a little bit on. One of the things that happened with Girls of the Sun, but we'll talk more about that in the third session, is that it's a film that was supposed to be in Kurdish full, because it's like there's no point for me in like using any other language than the main language of these people. And for financing reasons, I had to put a certain percentage of French. And so I had to introduce the character of a journalist, which, believe me, at first was like really not my cup of tea, because I wanted to stay away from that as much as possible. And then I had done a lot of research on the on the Yazidi women who had been kidnapped, but I had not done any research, like specific research on the journalists. And like here comes Xavier. Like someone's contact, I think, put me in touch with Xavier, and I started interviewing him, and I ended up interviewing him like almost every week for a year. And we would go and like have lunches, right, Xavier?
In my memory, is that the guy who introduced us is Alan Caval,
Yeah, Alain.
a war reporter from the Journal Le Monde, who was badly injured during the Karabakh War in 2020. But yes, at the time, he told me that you wanted to interview me about the Sinjar battle. And I was not surprised because I was interviewed by other journalists about this battle. But where I was surprised is that you were not satisfied for one interview. As you said, you interviewed me that, as you said, every week for almost a year, and you became like it was like a therapy to be interviewed by you at some point. So it was a big adventure, this interview.
Well, you have to understand that Xavier is very talkative. Like he's very social. So it was and he's been all over the place. He's worked with incredible people, and I quickly understood he had like such an understanding of everything at stake, and also he happened to have like a really good understanding of the forces, because you may be aware of it, but the Kurdish conflict is very complex on many levels. One of them being that even within the Kurdish community, there are several currents, and they're not, they don't necessarily agree with one another, which I try to sort of show as simply as possible at the very beginning, because they're a very horizontal organization in a way. So they have to they have to make it work with whoever is coming to that front at that moment within the forces. And it like for a Westerner, it was quite hard to grasp. And Xavier, I worked quite extensively, and to the point where it felt only natural for me to cast him as one of the journalists. He's one of the journalists that you see with Emmanuel Bercourt when she arrives, and he's famous for his boule d'amour, which is a ball of
Very
love.
important. Very
Very,
important
very important.
therapy on the field
Because
and outside the field.
exactly, as you can see, like there's a lot of camaraderie involved in these fields, because the circumstances are so hard that there is a heightened sense of camaraderie and like a sense of solidarity. So that's how we met, and to this day we're still very good friends, and we exchange on our work projects, and that I will say this about filmmaking and journalism as well. Those are fields where you cannot afford to be alone. You have to have people who have your back, who are your companions, like on the long term. I think that's kind of essential, because you have highs and lows, and you have moments where everything seems to collapse, and you just have to have people who have like a strong backbone. So I hope you guys have enjoyed his documentary, which, by the way, ironically, has been seen by how many million of
10
people?
millions.
10 million people. Yeah. Way more seen than my film in competition.
Yes, but I didn't go to Cannes with my film.
Well, we'll go back to that. As you know, it was quite an experience.
I know.
He was there as well. He was there on the Cannes battlefield. But so I wanted to ask Xavier a few questions that felt relevant to like our interrogation of the praxis, and you know, like how, you know, like how do you become a war reporter, you know, when you have like your story? So I wanted to ask Xavier, like the first question is, where do you come from? And what is your journey, you know, from your adolescence to becoming a war reporter? Like how does that make you a war reporter?
Okay, that's I can need a long time, but I'm gonna answer you in a short way. Well,
No,
I
no,
come
no,
from
you can take your time. It's fine. You can take your time. It's
So-
super interesting to hear you talk as you.
well, I come from a little town of east of France near Strasbourg, by the German border, Strasbourg, where we have the European Parliament. And I studied, and then I went to Paris to study, and I studied history and journalism. And then I went on, and I started my career as a journalist, first in the print press as an investigative journalist. And actually, I became a war reporter almost by accident. The thing is, at the time, I had a very good friend whose name is Stéphane Villeneuve, who unfortunately died in 2017 in Mosul. He stepped on a landmine. He was a war reporter. At the time, he was working at a press agency, a TV press agency called the Kappa. And he asked me to join him at this agency. And because they were specialized in war reporting, my first TV stories were on war reporting. So I started TV on this field. And the truth is that in I was going to say in French TV, but I guess in any TV, when you are identified in a special field, mine was armed conflict, they tend to only take the stories about your specialty, which actually was not my specialty because I can do I can do lots more than war reporting. And for instance, I remember after the Sinjar, after the Battle of Sinjar, I kind of needed a break from war. I had done like almost 6 or 7 months. It was all in the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, and I didn't want to do another story about war. So with a friend of mine, we brought a very cool documentary about some stolen, forgotten works of Picasso, who were hidden all over the world in private collections. So when I called the TV station, which was Arte, and I suggest this film, you know, to that I wanted to do this film, they told me, "Oh yes, it's very nice, it's a very cool film, but why don't you go to Nigeria to do something about Boko Haram?" And so I went to Nigeria, and I never did this piece on Picasso. And that's how I became war reporter. And actually, now I tend to not go so often to war zone because because I don't run as fast as I used to be, as I used to do. And it's still a very dangerous place, especially now. We're witnessing some new warfare with drones and stuff like that. And it started actually with the Karabakh War in 2020, but now with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, it became just a very new fashionable way to make wars. The drone wars. I'm thinking about this, and lately, last month, we lost another friend, French journalist, Anthony, who got who died by a kamikaze drone. So so that's how I became a war reporter.
And so how many conflicts have you been to so far?
Well, I went to Mali, Nigeria, Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Ukraine. I never went to Afghanistan.
Okay. And I'd be interested if you could talk a little bit for us from like the way you came to the mountain of Sinjar in 2014, and also your previous work that sort of helped pave the way to the mountains of Sinjar in Syria. If you could talk.
Sorry, I was distracted by a text message. You want to know how I went to
The mountain of Sinjar, like how you went to Sinjar, and like what you went through in Syria before sort of paved the way.
Okay, I see. Well, actually, my first intent was to go to Sinjar at first, and not to go to Syria. But at the beginning, the airlift to support the Sinjar was not really in place. It was not for journalists, and they had lots of complications. So per se, like there was this other battle in Kobane in Syria, another city which was besieged surrounded by ISIS. So I went there to cover this battle, thinking, well, by the time I'm finished in Syria, maybe there will be an opening to go to Sinjar. So I went to Syria. Complicated story.
Can you elaborate a little bit on Kobane?
Well, Kobane, I went at it's a very small town near the border of Turkey. So the thing is that there were lots of journalists in the Turkish border, and with long shots, long optical shots, you could see the war from far away, which is not the way I work. So I needed absolutely to get inside the city, but the city was surrounded by Daesh, so it was a bit complicated to find the right smuggler who could, because you couldn't, the border was closed, and then the Turkish guards, border guards, they were shooting at anybody who was going on from one way or another one. So you had to find a good smuggler. Well, I eventually, after 3 or 4 days, I eventually found the good one, but it was still complicated because we had to go to the border, check with the border patrol, and when they were not there, we had to crawl under barbed wire, and then we end up in landmines because on that side of the border there were mines everywhere. The good thing is that from time to time the cattle of the people were blowing up in those minefields, and they were opening some lines that the smuggler knew about, so we could cross more or less safely those mine lands. And then we had to wait for the Kurdish fighter to pick us up. So we hid in a car cemetery, sort of. It was a place where they had a lot of cars, abandoned cars from the refugees. And I was with civilians. The smuggler, we crossed with civilians who were going to help in Kobane, like doctors, dentists, surgeons, stuff like that. And there was a Syrian journalist, Simav Bedihan, who made the documentary Silvered Waters, who if I'm not mistaken, it was played in Cannes also. Anyway, so I was with Simav, but she's from Syria. She's Syrian, so she speaks the language. She looks like a Syrian girl. I don't look like a Syrian guy. And the first night, the fighter, they couldn't come to pick us up, so we had to wait and stay. And remember, the first night, that's when ISIS beheaded the British head worker. Alan Higgins, I think. I'm not sure about the name, but
Yeah.
and she showed me this on a phone. I told her that it was not such a great idea to show it to me. So we stayed like this, and fighters, they couldn't still come up, so they had an idea, because we were at this moment we are inside ISIS territory. I'm behind the front line, so I am in ISIS territory. Everywhere around me, people, they are evolving under ISIS law. So it was really, I needed to stay hidden, not to show myself. And at some point, Sima went to me and she said, okay, we have an idea. We're going to take one of the cars. We're going to go to the ISIS checkpoint. I'm going to say that I have some cousin in the city, and I'm going to say you are one of my Kurdish cousin, and that you're kind of retarded. So you don't speak, you can't speak. I'm going to say that you're some kind of retarded guy. And I say, no, I don't look Kurdish. I don't look Syrian. There's no way I can go through this checkpoint. But so we had to find another way, and eventually Ali, the smuggler, told me, we can't, I think you've been made. Some people are talking about a French journalist around. So we took one of the motorcycle that was abandoned, and he worked the wires of the motorcycle. It started it, and then we waited for the fight to begin, because when they were fighting each other, they were too busy, trying to kill themselves than looking for people near the border. And we jumped on a motorbike, and we crossed the battlefield on a motorbike one early morning. I remember Ali started to sing on his motorbike, if I was a rich man. And I was behind him, singing with him. And that's the way we entered Kobane in Syria.
God, see, that's the thing about war, and that's what I discovered when I was doing some research, is that there are a lot of absurd moments in war, because there's like so much death around people that they actually have moments where the release mechanisms sort of like, like pop up just weird stuff, and there's either absurdist comedy or moments of incredible vitality. For example, in Girls of the Sun, I really wanted to show those moments when people dance, because especially the Kurdish community has a strong relationship to dancing, and I think the bodies are always in resistance, against death around everyone, and that was very important to me. And there is a song in Xavier's documentary also about the Kurdish fighters sort of boasting about the fact that they're going to enter the city and they're going to take it. And I sort of took part of the song and transformed it and made it the song of the Girls of the Sun, because I thought it was such a beautiful moment to have people sing against their own fear and to reclaim that kind of stuff. But I wanted to have more moments of comedy in my film, but the subject matter was so heavy that it was very hard to put more than what I did. So you have like little moments at the beginning that I thought was important. And tell us a little bit more about Sinjar now, like how, like just so that people understand, like what's your process. What's so to get to Sinjar, for example, like what did you have to do? Like how did you get the idea? Like how did it start? How did you get there? How did you end up doing like a 3-week siege
Okay. Well, as I said just before, the idea came in August, summer 2014, when ISIS invaded Sinjar, and people were fleeing, and the massacre of Yazidi started. But at this time, it was complicated because the Syrian Kurd had opened a corridor to help people in the mountain, but ISIS took back this corridor. So the only way to get to the mountain was by helicopter. And in August, I couldn't secure a place in this helicopter. So then I went to Kobane in Syria. Then when I went back to Paris, Alan Caval, from my colleague from Le Monde, told me that we could have a place in a helicopter. So we went to Iraq, but still it was possible, but still we needed to be to get the clearance from the Azaish. Azaish is like the secret service from the Peshmerga. So we had to wait, like, I don't know, maybe 10 more days before getting clearance and being able to climb in a helicopter. So we went there. So we get in the helicopter. We went to the Sinjar mountain, and we could stay about 1 week. So in 1 week, we could see the state of the place and the refugee, and there was a lack of basically everything. But after 1 week, there was some kind of everybody was tense, stressed, and they said that we needed to leave the mountain because the airlift will stop. The helicopter will not come anymore, and
Which is basically the scene in Girls of the Sun where like all the journalists are
exactly.
getting evacuated,
Mm.
and you know, Mathilde decides to get in because she can only get in at that moment. Sorry.
Exactly. So I had, I talked with one of the fighter, and he told me, well, I think maybe you should stay. And I asked him, why? What do you think? Well, I think they're telling you to leave because the big battle is coming. And that was true, actually. There were a big battle to break the siege with Peshmerga, Syrian Kurds, YPG, and stuff like that. So I called my producer, and he told me that if I climb in this helicopter, I would regret it all my life. And I told him, I know you're right. And I said, okay, I don't care. I'm staying. I won't climb in a helicopter. So they were a bit surprised because they didn't. The thing is that I could barely speak Kurmanji, which was the main Kurdish dialect that everybody was speaking on the mountain. They were almost none of them was speaking English. I was all by myself. So it was quite funny at the beginning, difficult, but I was, language sign, uh, writings, I could make it easy. Now, like lately in Donbass in Ukraine, I was also all by myself, but with Google Translation. It works.
Yeah.
I didn't need a translator or fixer, and I takes more time, but it works better than sign language. And then I stayed 3 more weeks on the line on the battlefield, which was quite stressful and tiring, and after 3 weeks, I called my producer, and, I told him that I was exhausted. Actually, the very that very day I called him. I was in the souk filming a sequence about because it was a sniper battle in the souk. It's not in the documentary, by the way. And
You can explain to us why it's not in the documentary.
well, because I had so many things to do and only 52 minutes. Like we thought it was sort of more of the same, more of the same. It was, and
Oh,
it was
it's not the scene that you were when we prepped this. You were mentioning this. Like sometimes you have to make decisions about your characters and like what to follow. You know.
when they had the hostage to get back from the
When one of your characters got hurt, and then you had to make the decision whether to follow that character or to follow.
okay, yes, no, it's not about this.
Okay, sorry. Well, we'll get back to that later because that's interesting. So
Okay.
finish. Sorry.
So we were on roofs, all the snipers were on the roofs, and you had to crawl on the roofs and find the best way to shoot your characters, the fighters, and stuff like that. And at some point, I was on the back. I was filming like this on the back on a roof, and I could see the fighters were looking at me, and one of them did this, and then this. He pointed at me and I couldn't understand why he pointed at me. So I looked around. Maybe he was pointing something beside me, and actually, I just realized I was not standing, the opposite of standing, lying. I was lying in a pool of dry blood because one of their sniper was shot 3 or 4 hours earlier, and I was standing right in this place. And I looked around, and there was a big hole in the wall, and I was, like sitting duck for any ISIS sniper. And that's how I realized that I was too exhausted, too tired to work normally because I wasn't careful enough. I was careless. I was messy. It should never happen. Me being in a spot where someone just died 3 or 4 hours earlier. So and that's why when I because I was sleeping on the second line. I was all day long working on the front line, and then I was sleeping on the second line. And that day, when I 3 weeks after that, after the beginning, I called the producer and I told him I can't stay anymore. I'm exhausted.
Yeah, of course, because as a war reporter, you have to sort of stay alive. That's your main job.
Well, it's the main job of lots of people, but yeah, it's easier when you want to make the story to be alive. Yeah.
Exactly, and to keep on telling stories. And so there was something when we discussed that I found interesting. If you can circle back to that, where I was asking you about your characters, and you started mentioning the decisions that a journalist has to make. So
Yeah.
can you
Yes,
talk us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's about a very specific sequence in the film. At some point, well, they were fighting a gunfight between a Kurdish position and ISIS position, and the house I was in, it was a house with a big stone but very thin, like I don't know, you call it cemetery to make the stone glue together, and
Cement, yeah.
cement, and the bullets would go through very easily through the cement. And at some point, one of the fighter was standing 2 meters on my left side. I was with him just by standing by him, discussing with him like 20 seconds before, and he got shot. He got badly shot. So at the sequences in the documentary. So they took him. They tried to do the first aid.
Is it the young man who like it was his first day?
Yeah,
Okay.
Jamil, yeah.
Yeah. So it's at for anyone interested, it's at 2544.
And so they gave him first aid, but we were on the front line. They couldn't do more, so he had to be evacuated. And at this moment, I was, thinking, what do I do? Do I stay in the battle, or do I make a sequence with this injured guy and leave the front? So I have to make a decision. So I leave the front, so I may lose a story. But I'm following the wounded, and I have a new story with I have the beginning, I needed the middle and the end. But actually, it ended very quickly because he was so injured that he had to be evacuated to Syria, and there were no way I was going to follow him up to Syria. So I went back to I followed him until the ambulance took him away to Syria, and then I went back to the front line.
And is that the moment when you decided to go back to the souk? And
No, that's a few days later.
okay. Can you elaborate more on that moment as well? Because I think it's like two very interesting moments of the position of a war reporter. Like anyone who does nonfiction has a very different position from me as a fiction filmmaker, where you have to make choices about whether to follow someone, and sometimes it's just about like keeping the story, and other times it's about staying alive. So
And sometimes it's about both. There is another sequence which is not in a documentary, because in a sequence, well, as you know, I need a beginning, a middle, and the end. And if I'm missing one of those three, the sequence won't work. And I remember one day during the battle, one of my character, I was on the second line, down on the hill.
does everyone know what a second line is? Okay, no. Like, can you explain?
But behind the front line, you have the front line, the battlefield, and just behind the front line where you can sleep, you can eat, you are out of range of the bullets. You're not out of range of the shells. You still you get bombed. You're still in a kill zone, but nobody can fire at you. You're safe from snipers, for instance. You're not safe from artillery, but you're safe from snipers. So that's the second line.
Thank you.
Where I was sleeping and eating and charging my batteries and stuff like that. And one of the character of the film, one of the Yazidi fighter came and told me, we have to do an extraction mission. Some Yazidi hostage succeeded to run away from the ISIS squads. They are somewhere in the city. We're doing a mission. Do you want to follow us? And I say, yeah, of course, I'm following you. And we went there. We left 4 fighters plus me, trying to search for this. There were 2 adults and 2 kids. It was a family, and we were trying to get this family back to the secure line, the safe line. So we went inside the city. We progressed very carefully through the streets, and I had one repère. I don't know how you say repère.
Reference mark.
Yeah, one reference mark on in the city. There was a red building, and everything. The red building was like the frontier of the Kurds fighter, ISIS fighter, and I know that we were safe in here, and we were supposed to meet those people around the red building. And after like 40 minutes of wandering in the streets, running everywhere, I kind of look back to see where was the red building, to see exactly where we were. And we were way, way, way inside ISIS territory. And we were lost. We couldn't find the people we were supposed to rescued. And at some point, we were going to have to be rescued because at any time we could find a ISIS patrol and get killed or captured or both.
Uh-huh.
So I told him, I don't know what you plan on doing, but I'm going back. For me, stop. This is too dangerous. This is I need to go back because this has no meaning. As I told you, you know, fear is good because fear is your last bulletproof vest. You need to have some kind of fear, not the fear that will froze you. This is very, very bad. If you have that kind of fear, you cannot do this job.
Yeah.
But the fear that tells you, I don't feel this. I feel something's bad. We need to go back. We need to stop this. That kind of fear is good. Makes you come back alive.
Yeah. And so what's the link with the beginning, the middle, and end?
Well, I at the beginning of the sequence, like the preparation for the mission, rescue mission, a very good beginning. I at the middle, you know, we are searching for the hostage that we wanted to rescue, but didn't have the end. We didn't have the hostage. And for fun fact, when we came back to the second line, the family was there. They managed to get to Kurdish line without the rescue mission.
So it's completely useless
Yes.
for everyone involved. And that is a big difference between like a documentary filmmaker, a reporter, and fiction filmmakers, because you're constantly reacting to like life and like the situation, so you have to assess all the time. And on the other hand, someone like me sort of creates the reality that needs to be rendered. And so we have a very different relationship to what you have access to. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I was so interested in doing Girls of the Sun, because obviously no journalists had been able to go with the Yazidi women within, you know, like the lines. Like it's just not something that anyone has access to ever. And I thought that fiction was the only way we could have some sort of trace, some sort of memory of those moments. And on the fourth session, I will touch more specifically on the representation of trauma, and more specifically with this on the representation of rape, because that's definitely like something that preoccupied me a lot as a female filmmaker, and trying to do things as responsibly as I could. But you know, I'm really grateful to journalists and war reporters like Xavier, who give us access to so many incredible elements. And you know, I have to say I employ Xavier as a consultant, as an actor. You know, like he just became part of my work process on the film, for sure. And there's many, you know, I'm indebted to him in many ways, because I don't think the film could have been the film it is without him at all, because it just helped me anchor many things. Even when sometimes I could not, because, you know, like there's things that I can do as a fiction filmmaker and there's things I cannot do. For example, I was obsessed, absolutely obsessed with the idea of rendering the battle on the hill. I had images, it was beautiful. you know, you had like this vision of like all the Kurdish fighters just like going up the hill and just like taking the city. And we did not have enough financing to pull that off. So I ended up doing the tunnels, which I'll be able to talk about it a bit more later. It was absolute misery. I hated writing it. I hated filming it. We like there was an issue with the practicality of making the tunnels. They were not high enough. So we spent 3 days shooting the tunnel like this because we could not stand up and there was not enough air. And then in the edit, I just took like a dislike to that scene, and I just told my editor, you just have to take care of it because I have something else in my mind and I just hate every second of this. So sometimes, you know, you have a conflictive relationship to what you produce, and that's okay. It's part of creation. It's fine, you know, it happens. But you know, I still have Xavier's images of the hills and the hill and like how cinematic and incredible it is in terms of tactic. A scene I'll never make. um, but um, I'd like to ask you a few more questions about the film. Is there anything else, like in terms of the scenes that are in the documentary, that you like to expand on, apart from that scene with his name is what, Berivan, right? Berivan,
Berivan.
yeah, Berivan, yeah.
Uh,
Apart from these two moments when, you know, like you had this one character you could not follow, or like this part of the story that you had A, B, and not C.
mhm.
Is there something else that you like to talk about in the documentary?
Mm. Well, well, I have lots of anecdotes, you know, I could talk about, but more about the everyday life in on the field, on the battlefield, like I was in Sinjar during Christmas, and there were no very few Christian fighter during the battlefield, the battle. And I remember the evening of Christmas, the Kurd, they were very excited, and they went to wake me up at 5 o'clock in the morning, like every morning. And they told me, come, we have a special breakfast for you. And they say, yeah, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. And they managed to find two fresh eggs in this city. I don't know where they found it, but they have this little attention for me, for like, oh, we have eggs, let's give it to Xavier as a Christmas gift. That was
That is so sweet.
mm,
I do have to say, like Kurdish hospitality and like the way they treated, I mean, for me, for example, as a filmmaker, I have found nothing but absolute generosity and collaboration. And you know, they always sort of an understanding that I was an ally, that we were allies, and we were, you know, like of goodwill, and we're just trying to work with them to convey their voices, which is something for me has always been essential to my process, you know, like from the writing, where I don't think there's one line in the script that's in the mouth of a Kurdish character that I have not heard or like got communicated or so, you know, witnessed. It's something that was very important. You know, I felt obviously much more at ease with inventing things with the French journalist and the journalists in general. That was something that was easier, but you know, and we'll elaborate a bit more on this. But even all the actors were Kurdish, to the point where we had to fly a lot of people because, like, where we're filming, which ended up being in Georgia, we'll talk more about that. There were not enough Kurdish actors for us to draw from. So you know, like that that relationship with the Kurdish community was like cared for along the way, and you know, it you can sense it in Xavier's work, and you know, like from the prep to the reception of Girls of the Sun, it was like a big point. And Xavier, you told us, are you there? Yeah, you're there.
Yes.
Sorry, you changed box. In the same box. So you told us that you sort of fell into war reporting with the segment on Boko Haram, right? But I mean, like, you were not supposed to do that. You were supposed to do like something else. That's what you said earlier, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, how do you digest and process coming from like a covering non-conflict zones, and then all of a sudden your work becomes that, and like, because it is a decision. For example, after I did Girls of the Sun, I was like, I'm definitely not a war reporter. And that's okay, you know, it has to be fine. And I just saw you, Lucy. I will get to you in a second. And you know, like, how do you accept that you are going to have this life? And was it for you some sort of act of resistance? Because, like, you know, part of the similar part of what I'm interested in is this notion of resistance, and how can we be part of some sort of resistance to like bigger conflicts? And like, was it something important for you? Was it something that you did not intellectualize? There's no right answer, by the way.
I mean, I see where you're going. No, it's not. For me, it's not an act of resistance to do war reporting. I report on people who are doing resistance, who are acting, who are resisting on something, any kind of oppression or any kind of injustice. For me, reporting on this is not committing to resist on the same level as they do. Now, if you consider that communicating on the act of resistance is in a way practicing a resistance, then yes, okay. Me, it's not the way I see it. The way I see it is, if the report I make on those people, because this is inspiring people who are doing all these actions of resistance. If my reports will make you evolve in any way, the way just by seeing it, then I think that my work is not completely useless, and I'm okay with this.
Yeah, that's fair. That's as I said, there's no good or wrong answer. Lucy, tell us.
Hi,
Hi, Lucy.
nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
I have a quick question actually relating to small acts of resistance, and also the languages surrounding documentary and fiction film. And I
You come
guess,
from a filmmaking background, right, Lucy?
yeah, fiction.
Yeah.
And then workshops and stuff. Yeah, so I'm curious about, or like in documentary filmmaking, then this use of the word subjects, my subject, my characters, and then in fiction film, then my actors, and then in relation to that, the figure of the director, and then also, you know, these things like, oh, that if in the script, then many of the dialogues came directly from people who are interviewed, then I'm constantly like interested in finding ways to problematize and question the structures of the filmmaking industry that demand this author and these languages that frame people in a particular. I don't know, like the other day I heard someone talking about ethnography in a way that, like, those practicing ethnographers might consider themselves to be tools when they go out to interview people, tools for the people who they are speaking with. I was with this activist called Ashanti Reese, who's working in the US with in certain communities, and I wondered what you all thought of that. Like, it's for the whole group, like, because obviously also, or in cinema funding, then obviously they wish to maintain the figure of the author, and these kinds of notions of collaboration suddenly in funding applications or in, when you publish the thing or whatever, then it's important for the structures to erase that. And I feel like that's something that is also something that could be resisted. And I wonder what everyone thinks of that.
I mean, I can answer for my part, and then we can ask Xavier. I do consider myself at the service of some sort of collective, like imaginary, and I'm just like an entry port, in my humble, like in the sense that I happen to be positioned to be able to push some buttons and like get some things into action. And it happens to be my job to do that. And after I try as much as possible to be aware and conscious. For example, I know in the filmmaking industry, like there's been upset about over, or even like recently, for example, in France, there was this novelist who got accused to like steal somebody's life story without telling her. And I guess that's part of your question, right? And I would totally object to something like that, because I think that is not deontological. But in my case, which is why I was saying earlier that I was just trying to like make a fictional reality and taking all the species taken from reality and like digest them through the lens of fiction, so that they happen to have some sort of coherence within a fictional world, so that it would not be disrespectful to the actual witnesses or interviewees, but it would be useful to the audience, the public. And I'm a lens for that. Like that's high, which is also why I was able to make peace with all this trauma, that I was the recipient of, because I had accepted that position and also knew it was transient. And that was part of the journey of that story. And I think if you position yourself properly, it can give you like that tool to not get your ego too much involved in it. And I think it's like the same in reverse. Your ego should not get too involved in it. Like, a lot of filmmakers or storytellers, like since the dawn of times, like we're just like humble, like we pass on the stories. And sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's less. But personally, that's why I like the word praxis. I think it's also an end in itself, the doing it, because it's important in terms of being part of the collective and part of the journey. And all you can do is like do your best to honor. Some people have more ethics than others, but that's how it goes, I guess. How do you feel about that, Xavier?
Sorry, I was distracted by some messages. How do I feel about
How
what?
do you feel about start reading your text? How do you feel about the respect of the deontology towards the subject, and like the ethics of interviewing people and passing on their stories, and like the right distance?
The right distance is very fundamental question when you're doing a documentary. Um, uh, and the way I find it is, I'll say to not film at the beginning when you're with someone that you're gonna, you're gonna spend a few times with him, you're gonna see him for days or weeks, and I always think the beginning, I have my camera, but I don't film him for like the first or 2 days. I know I'm gonna film him after that, so I kind of search the distance like this. Don't know if I answered the question.
You answered the question your way. That's good. Does anyone else want to say something about that? And then maybe like to wrap this up, because it's so obvious that I didn't even mention it, but of course there's like the notion of privilege, like, you know, the point where you're standing, and for me, like, that was a big part of the conversation, which was, you know, like, not part of the collective conversation at the time. If you reframe 2014, the notion of privilege was like barely touched upon, but I was acutely aware, because I grew up with a lot of multicultural people around me. I'm myself, you know, I come from immigration, you know, I have like two cultures, like I'm sensitive to these things personally. So it was very important for me that all those cultural matters, for example, were really part of the process. Again, you know, like it's a question of process. For example, the lady who's going to join us for the last session, Zeynep Akyol, she is a Kurdish filmmaker, and I went to her, you know, once I had written like a solid version of the script, and was like, I really want you to be brutal. You know, if there's anything that you feel is absolutely inappropriate, or like, you know, whitewashing, or just, you know, just like some sort of cultural appropriation, I just don't, I wanted to stay away from that, because that is important to the story I'm telling and how I want to approach things. And, you know, I did that on set all the time. You know, for me, like, it was very important that all the key people made sense with the story, and like that the actors who were Kurdish, for example, would have a say in like the way they were dressed and etc. So that it just never felt that was something that was just not pertinent. And I would approach that like towards anything, you know, like my previous film Bang Gang was about teens having sex and etc. And you know, I always checked in with them to like see like what was appropriate to them, what was okay, like what kind of culturally, like where they were at, because you know, I was very young in my head when I wrote the film, but I was 35, you know? So I was not a teen anymore, and I think it's always important to, as long as you're aware of your distance and that you check in, you know, it's like consent. You know, you just have to check in. You just have to make sure it's okay. And I think if you have goodwill, and you surround yourself with, you know, like the right people, you've done your due diligence, and that's what's important. But that's essential. That is definitely essential. I have one last question for you, Xavier.
I think Samantha maybe wanted to add something.
Oh, sorry, Samantha.
Maybe.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Eleanor. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt because I was so immersed in what was being said. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. I just wanted to thank you as well for the session. It's been so intriguing, and I don't have a background in filmmaking, so it's also been interesting just hearing about the
Thank you.
process and the method that goes behind everything. And I was curious about the question about violence and kind of the depiction of it, and
Yeah.
you and Xavier's proximity to it, especially. I was born in Kenya, and I think growing up in an African context and grew up watching films about our particular context, I think I developed a form of oppositional gaze to the films that I engaged with about the wars around me, or kind of the poverty around me. And even when there were attempts not to fall into certain biases or gazes, it kind of always still emerged. And so I do resonate with what Lucy asked, about constantly negotiating those power dynamics, and even as someone who does that kind of work in like an NGO philanthropic context, I'm always thinking about how I also kind of feed into those biases. But I was curious about how maybe that proximity to violence affected what you have both chosen to show or not to show, because I do think being proximate or in the field does kind of shift that. And while trying to stay true to what you've mentioned, Eva, kind of not giving into that Western gaze or that tendency to sanitize um, violence or the reality on the ground. And also how much independence you have in choosing what not to show, especially in situations, very complex situations like the Kurdish conflict or even Boko Haram, where there's so much state-sponsored censorship, and that in itself can have you jailed or put your life at risk. And so I'm curious about how you've navigated that proximity to conflict. And sorry, this is so verbose, but I hope I've gotten my question across.
No, that's fair. I mean, on my end, it was central to my reflection on the film because, especially as a woman, you know, like violence on screen feels like has been historically, you know, seen from a male gaze. So I was very aware of that. So I wanted to like be conscious of this. And then also as a Westerner, you know, like there was like a double grind here. I will say this. I tried, for me, like a focal point was to give more screen time to the fighting part, like the process, than some sort of aestheticized violence. You know, I didn't want to go there. That said, any film fails because like any represented violence on screen is like some sort of, you know, is pornographic in a way. You know, you can't escape that. You have to make peace with that because otherwise you're just gonna go, you know, like, you know, you're gonna run in circles like a headless chicken, and it's a little bit pointless. So after that, there's a scope, you know, there's like the 70s where like they just really went for it, like, you know, Apocalypse Now, which is grandiose film in many ways, but just really revels in the depiction of violence. And, you know, of course, any medium goes through stages of maturing. I think filmmaking now, you have films who still don't have like a very thoughtful approach to it, where violence is glamorized, etc. I wanted to like stay away from that as much as possible. And anytime violence was on screen, it was because it had a narrative purpose. You know, for example, when one of the girls in the tunnel steps on a mine, you know, they have to have moments where, you know, like the fight seems to be lost, and you know, it's a narrative, it's a narrative point. And as for the rape, I will talk extensively on that because that was very specifically handled from me in a way that I don't want to say too much about it now, but basically it was an absolute no for me to represent rape frontally because I've always been repulsed in films my whole life, when 99% of the time you know and understand that it's becoming some sort of erotic device that has been like just, you know, deviated from the female experience. And for me, one thing that was very hard in this film is that you're talking about women who have been raped so many times in real life they can't even count anymore. It's to that point. So, you know, it's this whole tale, you know, like once is a tragedy and, you know, like 1,000 is a statistic. So how do you talk about that? And the solution I had was rape is never an act against one person. It always has ripple effects on the community. So I thought that the best way to have the audience identify with the experience of a rape was through her sister, hearing her sister getting raped. And I can tell you that was the hardest scene to shoot of the whole thing. it was I was like absolutely destroyed after that scene, and like we didn't even shoot anything, but like just like everything that came with it was just so powerful. But anyway, so that very succinctly, that is the response I would give to you. And but I think it's important to make peace with the fact that part of it is you cannot avoid it in your process. If it's like the power dynamics, of course there were times when I was interviewing women, it just felt like such a cognitive dissonance for me, because I knew I would go back to safety afterwards, and I knew they would remain there. And I was, like part of me was devastated, but I was also aware that the only thing I could do actually was what I was doing from my position. There's nothing, much that I could do. Even like that woman that I'm mentioning, Zeri, who just really touched me because she was extremely, she had suffered so much and she just wanted to testify. She just wanted people to know what happened to her. So we spent hours together, and I tried to find her later because I wanted to make sure that, like she had some sort of economic safety net or whatever, and I could never find her again because, like by nature, the situation are transient, and this life is very precarious. And you just have to show up how you can and when you can. That would be my honest, if not, it's profoundly unsatisfactory, by the way, but I just don't know how to approach this differently. What about you, Xavier? Like, what's your position towards
Well,
violence and
first, my first filter is self-censorship. On the battlefield, you will always see stuff that you cannot show. That is it's not a use. It's not worth showing it. I have an example in Sinjar. I was following a patrol of Syrian Kurds, and we were one behind another, and we were burning in the streets. They were approaching the position, and at some crossroad, I saw the captain of the tough guy, captain of the Kurd Syrian, turn right and then went straight back, and he started to throw up all his guts on the streets. And I realized that on this corner there was something that was very disgusting, and there was something very, very disgusting involving dead bodies. There was no way I was going to film it. There was no way I was going to show it. However, in the film, I was confronted to this thing about violence on screen with the child. There is a sequence when the Kurdish fighter enter a room, and they find the bodies of a father and his son, and there is marks of injuries and tortures on the father and on the son. And when I first screened the version with the TV chargé de programme, how could I translate that?
commissioner?
The TV commissioner was going to say, okay, we take the film, or no, you change this, you change this. And she told me, okay, perfect. There is only one slight change. We're going to blur the face of the child. But the face of the child wasn't injured. He was dead, but he wasn't injured. And I told her, if you blur the child, you will kill him twice. And they say okay, it was relevant. I was trying to tell it was relevant in this sequence to see the end of the violence. The end of the violence is the death of the child. I didn't show the injuries of the child. I just showed the face of the dead child. And then they said okay, and it was aired like this, and the face wasn't blurred. But it's very difficult now, especially on the group France Télévisions, France Television, because they have someone who is in charge of the ethics, and for them, nowadays when you film a child, even if he's not injured or anything, but even if you have the authorization of his parents, you have to blur it. And I had these difficulties on a film about the traumas of the children in Ukraine. And at the beginning, the ethics guy from the channel, which is France 5, wanted to blur every children. You're making a film about the traumas of the war on the children, and he wanted to blur every face of the children. Well, it's after negotiations and to see that it was it was very relevant to see the face of the children. Eventually, it was possible to film them, but yeah, the for me, it's the main question is it relevant to see this level of violence? And if it is, you can show it.
Yeah, it circles back to what I was saying for fiction, which is is it important for the narrative? Does the story need it? And it has to like be justified, you know, for the story. And as to censorship, I think I'm lucky in this sense because I, you know, like being a filmmaker in France, like there's barely anything in cinema that is, you know, positively censored or like where it's going to be a big problem. I had many more issues with my movie about teenagers having sex. For example, in terms of like needing to like be aware of the censorship, you know, I did not, for example, I employ any actor below 18 because I didn't even want to get there. It's like this is just not a conversation I want to have. And on this one, I would say that I didn't censor myself, but you know, like there was a time when I wondered if I was not putting myself in danger, and I was like, "Oh, you're ridiculous! Like nobody cares, you know. This is France, blah blah." Until I saw the two bodyguards that the French government had assigned me during the Cannes Film Festival, who, you know, like stayed with me for 10 days straight, and I was like, "Oh." Let's not expect that. They didn't even tell me on top of it. I just like the two guys just showed up and I was like, oh, okay, we're talking about that. So again, naivete, beautiful thing. You know, just you just gotta do the things sometimes. Um, but I saw Farzad had a question, but he's not there anymore. So I wanted to ask you guys to do one exercise for me and for you. If you want to write it down, if you want to take a pen, it's something you can either like do in 3 minutes now, or you can send me later. But I would like you to consider that idea of where you're coming from and from where you stand in life, right? In terms of like class, history, and your own like journey. And I would love to have you write one family story about struggle, justice, or survival, but just something that was passed on to you within your own family. And I think what I'm interested in, and like you actually don't have to share that with me, is I really want you to note the feelings that it sort of evokes in you, which is like, is it pride, shame, duty, distance? Because I think that these feelings that it's gonna conjure up is what's gonna be interesting for you in terms of your own work and your own journey. And so that you understand that basically all storytelling carries an effective contract. And if it doesn't, it's because you're not where you should be standing. So again, you can either like think about it while we're talking or send that to me later. But I want to hear what you guys have to say about that. And by the way, if you feel that you don't want to share it, it's fine also. But I'd be very interested in knowing more about you through this device, basically. Is that clear for everyone? Wonderful. All right. So hopefully you'll send this to me for the next seminar, the next session. So thank you, Xavier, so much. Like, do you guys have any other question for Xavier? Yes, Artur.
Hello. So I wanted to ask Xavier about, I think it relates to one of the last questions about the effect of his presence in Sinjar with the Kurdish fighters. Because, you know, like this is such a topic, for example, in anthropology, how when you make yourself present in that place or community or reality or so on, that in a way you changed it, like by default. Like from then on, we should always consider that there is an eye, a gaze there. And I was also thinking about this when I was watching in your documentary, for example, the moments of gathering, social sort of scenes. For example, when we have that woman soldier teaching, talking to the male soldiers about the presence of women in war, about feminism and so on. Also when they're gathering and saying we need to win, etc. So I wanted to ask if you could say something about this, like if what you thought in terms of how they react, if maybe they were, if you wondered at some point if they were avoiding a certain topic because of your presence, or bringing a topic or an attitude because of it, or some sort of attitude regarding what changed in that reality, in that extreme reality, with this otherness, sort of.
Okay, I see what you mean, and you're totally right. The effect of the camera, it's always something you have to. It takes us back to the right distance of the subject that you're filming. But I think what helps me on this film the most to achieve this right distance also is the fact that I barely speak Kurdish and they didn't speak English, so the communication was kind of limited to the only basic stuff. And since I was there all the time, it's kind of I was, you know, part of the furniture. And they didn't even pay attention to me at some point, except when I was with my units, going to other units. And then that's something I found out in the editing room, because, you know, they were talking in front of me, but I didn't know what they were talking about. And at some point, I was on a roof with one of my character and three women fighters that I've never seen before. And I was, you know, following them, but, you know, I wasn't in a line of fire, so I was always, you know, at some position where I could hear and film. And the translator in the editing room, when they were translating all those sequences, at some point he went to my editing room and he, hey, did you know they were talking about you in this sequence? I did, no, of course I didn't know. And what did they say? Well, basically the female fighter, they were surprised to see me, and they asked the guy who's the. They thought I was the cameraman from the PKK, because they had a cameraman from the PKK. And he say, no, it's a French journalist. I don't know what he's going there, but he's here everywhere all the time. He followed us everywhere. You will see him again. Don't worry. He's here all the time. And it's something that I felt I was accepted because of that, you know, because there were no place I wouldn't go with them. And the conversation was almost non-existent, you know. I was like on the fly on the wall, and they wouldn't pay attention to me. That's it.
It's as if you were in everywhere, but in a way there was not a very consolidated place for you, in the sense that you were not relating to them at all time.
No, it's, as I said, it was, they kind of got used to me. It was normal for me to be around them, and they wouldn't pay attention to me. Like it was very the fly on the wall type of filming. I would get invisible.
Yeah, and I think, it just goes back to all this ethical question of point of view and what it means and how can you remove yourself as much as possible to let the situation unfold in front of you. But the only way to truly achieve that would be to remove a camera or to do something that's quite unethical that is going to start to happen, by the way, which is, for example, the use of Google Glasses. I've seen people use that already, where people are unaware. So if people are unaware, then they don't affect what is being filmed, but like ethically, people don't know that they're being filmed. So it's the same thing. It's double binder. You have to accept the foundational principle that you're there and you're the person intervening on the situation by filming it. Once you make your peace with that, you can either like try to do it ethically or not, but that's an ethics question then. And to like bounce back to Samantha's earlier question about violence, I think there's also a way to reframe that question because, as I said, you cannot re-escape violence on screen. But I guess my desires stem, for example, from the idea that the first violence is the violence of silence. And when people silence other people, and that these people don't get access to voicing what's happening to them, it's even more violent. And it goes back to Fanon's characterization of violence and colonization, is the colonization that is the utmost violence. And of course, you can use or depict violence against it, but it's the only way. It's the only way to actually depict reality and what is in front of you. So, in a way, I film not violence itself, but what the violence erases, even if it's the violence. So that's just something I wanted to add as a nuance. And maybe that's why I opened my film the way I did. Because the film opens on a world that has been silenced through an explosion. And it's the face of a woman. You have no idea where she's from, like what's happening. She's covered in dust. And all of this was very intuitive, like this is like I did not go about it trying to make a point. These are images that I was just seeing in my head, and it was like I knew from probably the first draft of the film that it was going to be the opening of the film. But it was just very important for me that the from the silence emerged some sort of world of sound and some chaos, and like we were trying to reorganize this. And by the way, I tried to get some annotated version of the script for you guys, but then I realized the script is in French. So kind of pointless. And then I only found like my post-production versions. So you know what? That's great. See here, like the first word, like can you see? It's absolute silence. These are the first words of my script. So I hadn't even like reread it. It is that. I think it's a very interesting entry point into what you can think about, what in terms of creator, artist, you know, what has been silenced for you that deserves to be unsilenced, and like how much are you willing to like, you know, how much energy you're willing to put into that, because it's going to be a beast, you know, like but it's going to be your beast, so I guess that's fine. What else can I say about the script that would be interesting for you in terms of like process? Yeah, you know, like I think one of the fundamental qualities of a script, it works as a dialogic document, not a report. Cinema really, for me, like works at its best when it sort of gives you several elements and you can make sense of them by combining all the elements together, which is why, for example, the military strategy scenes in the film, I didn't want to take anyone's point of view. I just wanted to like show what were the like the dynamics of power at work, like what their interests were, because it sort of showed the complexity of the situation. And I just knew, like, also from my point of view as a filmmaker, I was not interested in the ideological output of this, because, you know, like I think the written medium is way more powerful than a film for that. You know, you can clearly see my views, like where I'm leaning when I make a movie about Marxist fighters. You know, I don't need to like make like entire theoretical speeches about it. But I think that's an interesting element of any kind of film, whether it's like an emotional drama or historical, blah blah. It whatever dialogue you can instill in it is a very interesting way of getting into the issue. And you know, just the idea of that, when you write about uncertainty, when you preserve a certainty in film, it seems always more interesting than closing it. Oh yeah, I wanted to touch base on two films that I gave you to watch, The Battle of Algiers and Beau Travail. I hope you guys have had the opportunity to watch them. Do you find it hard to like find them, or was it okay? That's a complete silence.
Personally, I couldn't find Beau Travail.
You couldn't?
No,
You're in France. Like, it's
I
easy.
couldn't. Where did you find it?
On the Cinétech.
Ah, well,
You
it was.
you just go on Allociné and it gives you like the options on video on demand. It's super easy. Who has seen Beau Travail here? Oh yeah, Mara. Just what do you want to say, Mara?
Oh,
Well done.
I wanted to touch on something you said very much at the beginning, but this
Yeah.
idea that distinguish your work as a filmmaker from Xavier's work, that you have a need for mediation.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was thinking, because I work as a film curator at film festivals, so my experience is mostly in the film's reception, and I find it really interesting, and this is a shift I've noticed, but especially with films that touch on violent contexts that are real. Audiences no longer recognize mediation. And I mean, to give a very obvious recent example, but Emilia Perez, the Jacques Audiard film,
Yes.
like that film's
Right.
reception. I'm in Mexico City right now, but I sort of lived the reception of the film in different festivals where it played. And in Mexico, it was completely destroyed.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the shape of that criticism was, you know, saying it's, well, you know, it's a foreigner making a film about our reality. It was mostly about how it lacked realism or it was inaccurate. And it was really interesting because it's a musical, so there's no really aspiration to verisimilitude. But I don't know
what your experience is, if you've also seen a shift where there's a more maybe literal relationship between audiences and films that factors out the fiction. And related to that, this idea of privilege, I think it's always kind of thrown on, or the accusations are thrown on the filmmakers because you're in charge of the representation. But oftentimes, the people criticizing or accusing the films are not aware of their own privilege, in the sense that they cannot verify whether something is truthful because they a lot of the times don't have a direct experience of that reality either. So I don't know. It's just things that were on my mind.
This is a great topic, because I think it's extremely relevant to our times, and there is a misunderstanding between, you know, like the audience and readership in general, and people who write and create and like make films. Anna Cronbleu, I don't know if you've read the book. I wrote a book about the notion of immediacy and immediatism that is super interesting. There is certainly a decrease of mediation and a rise. Like we live in a world of immediacy. Like nothing should be mediated. You know, like even social media has sort of made this explode, as if, you know, like mediation was irrelevant. But I think what's interesting, you know, like in defense of mediation, I would say that it gives you this notion of digestion and distance that is relevant and necessary for some topics. And, you know, even Xavier, who does supposedly something that's unmediated because he's a war reporter, you know, he has to react. Well, he, at the end of the day, he has his point of view, and like he builds a narrative. And he offers his expertise as someone who has experience and who has thought about the issue. You know, a lot of things require studying and reflection and a collective mind to be able to digest them. And the only way through that is mediation. Like it's just like there's no other way. So I'm very interested to see like if that's something that is a definite shift, and if we're entering an era of absolute immediatism, because if that's the case, we're all doomed to failure, because you cannot think properly if that's your only outlet, if it's only about like constant immediacy. Because it's just going to go back to this idea of the headless chicken running in circles, you know. And I'll touch upon it on the reception of Girls of the Sun. You know, like there was already in 2018 a sense that maybe that mediation was not appropriate, but like I will expand on it. Like it was way more complex than this. But I think maybe it was like sort of, you know, like happening already, like something like that. But you know, it's actually interesting as a bridge to Beau Travail and the Battle of Algiers, because they're the polar opposites of filmmaking, in the sense that one movie, which is from 1999, which is probably the height of mediation, you know, like it's 1999 is one of the best years for filmmaking, and it's all about films that really work through absolute fiction. And Beau Travail, you know, for those who have not been able to see it, it's a movie about the Foreign Legion, which is like a body of soldiers in France who are recruited from foreign countries. They work for France, and they usually sent to colonies. Let's call a cat, you know, to work for France. And one of the reasons I was interested is because my grandfather was part of the Foreign Legion at some point. And Claire Denis, she strips all this very hierarchized world and uses the bodies as an absolute choreography. to show the like the rigor of a world, like a world that has become completely senseless, where people die or live, like there's no rhyme nor reason, and she makes it something absolutely fascinating. But I don't know if a movie like this could exist in 2025 without being absolutely slaughtered. But I feel it's one of the best movies of all time because it's absolutely hypnotizing, despite showing only a male-coded world, besides being like barely female gazy, like she's a female director, but like the gaze is certainly coded by the cinema of the time, and there's no clear reflection on the women in the film. And on the opposite side of the scope, you have the Battle of Algiers, which was released in 1966, and it was revolutionary at the time, and it's still a major film in world cinema, to the point where Paul Thomas Anderson's movie One Battle After the Other is some sort of homage to the Battle of Algiers, to the point that there is a scene in the film where he shows the Battle of Algiers. And at the time it was revolutionary because it felt so documentary style that people thought it was real when it was a complete fiction, but it just had like he was one of the first filmmakers to like side with the oppressed in colonial times and show what the Algerian people was going through at the time from their point of view. And it was a very low budget film. They had to like redub all the dialogues, and there's not like none of the main characters are female, so it's very male gazy. In terms of contemporary audiences, I think it's quite hard to grasp for like non-cinephile audiences, because it's very rough to watch. But it is the apex also of a cinema verite, which, by the way, also came after the war, where people just like were in need of like these are pendulums also, like the people were in need of an absence of mediation, like some sort of sense of realism, and that felt that it was the right thing. And then like people get bored of that, and then they go back to more mediation, and at least it has gone this way in the history of cinema. But like we like, I feel that we're living in such times that it's really hard to tell what's going to happen now, because social media is reshaping what cinema is felt. And like I saw the other day, there's an expression now, like TikTok cinema. I have no idea what that means, because for me it's like completely antinomic. Like it's not cinema, because cinema is the very definition of cinema is mediation, and it's time, and it's an industry, and it's got its flaws, because sometimes you get in too late, but it also gives you the time to process and have take your time. I compare it to like a PhD, if you will. It's an enormous amount of information. It's fucking boring most of the time, but at the end of the day, you know what you're talking about if you've taken, like the time, and if you've done it properly. So that's I guess that would be my take on this idea of mediation, which is really fascinating. Before I conclude our first session, is there any question that you guys have not asked and would like to? Wonderful. So thank you so much for being part of this. Just be aware that when I see your faces, it's so much easier for me, because I can see you react, and I can see you engaged. And I've been on the other side of Zoom, so I know sometimes you don't feel like showing your face, you feel it's not important, but it is. Thank you, John. No, honestly, I mean it. Like because I also just remember I'm a director, so I read people's faces all the time. That's my job, you know. And like I can sort of react differently. Lucy.
Hi, yeah, just a quick question. I was wondering, like for the overall process of the seminar, what kind of things are we going to be working towards in terms of the kind of final
That's
thing
a
that
good
we
question. Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking it. I would like you to produce a work that's for you an act of resistance, whatever that means for you. And that can be very simple. That can be more elaborate. And oh yeah, by the way, no, producing nothing is not an act of resistance in this context. You know? I'm sorry, this is not contemporary art. It's a seminar. So it can be like a small essay. It can be, you know, if you're a painter, it's whatever your medium is, basically, whatever your medium of expression is. If you want to submit a short film, it has to be under 10 minutes because otherwise I'll die. If I get like 26, you know, like 10-minute shorts. It can be like a piece of music. I just like you, and remember, it's always for you. Like it's not for me, you know, like you don't have to impress me or anything. I want you to think what it means for you. And what is vital for you that you feel that you're interested in defending it. So, and I would like you guys to submit this at the end of the last seminar. And then next session, is that clear for everyone? Cool. And if you have questions, you can still ask the questions, you know, like I'll be happy to answer. Then, you know, I was very interested in like having the second seminar being the opposite side of like the experience of making a film, which was the reception. And, you know, the reception, we'll get into it next time, but the reception of Girls of the Sun was complicated, to say the least. I'll read you, you know, glorified excerpts of articles about it. And so the idea is like, I guess what happens when the act of restoring erased voices meets the emotional codes of global cinema, you know, like high sincerity read differently when it comes from women, because I think that's an important part of the journey of being like a female filmmaker. And so we'll address the reception and the affective policing. I guess that's my that's going to be my angle on this. And I can't wait to share that with you. But thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Have a great evening or morning wherever. Oh, can I have an idea of like what countries you guys are listening from? So Mara, you're in Mexico, right?
I'm in Mexico City, yeah.
Yeah, and Lucy as well,
also
right?
in Mexico
Yeah.
City.
What about you, Eleonora?
I'm in the Netherlands.
In where? Netherlands?
The Netherlands, and well, in Utrecht.
Okay. Clara?
Oh, I'm in Prague. I'm in the Czech Republic.
Wonderful. Lisa?
I'm in Switzerland, in Basel, but I speak French.
Merci. Aga, where are you listening from?
I'm in Scotland, in Glasgow.
Wonderful. Jiayang?
I'm in China. Now it's midnight, it's
Thank you
12:34.
so much. You're so brave. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing the Slack process.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. What about you, Christine?
I think I'm sharing the same time zone with Yao Yang. It's GMT+7 in Indonesia.
Wow. Cool. What about you, Arthur?
I'm in Berlin.
Berlin. Okay. But okay. And Samantha?
I'm in Nairobi.
Wonderful. That is so exciting. Thank you, guys. And Anna?
I am in Belgrade, Serbia.
Wonderful. Well, so we're really all over the place. I love it. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week. And please check in. I'm probably going to add 1 or 2 movies for next week. And by the way, if you have an issue with like watching the films, please let me know, and maybe we can like try and find ways to make that easier for you guys. And also just know that the movies that I'm assigning to you I just think they're great movies of canon of cinema, and I think it's just always interesting to take the opportunity to like discuss these things, because it doesn't happen that often. So thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Xavier. And thank you, Reda.
Merci.